Welcome everyone, and thank you for being with us here for the second of the partnership parallel sessions. We're very excited to have you here, and we look forward to an interactive discussion. We have a wonderful panel here with us. So we have Cristina Rumbaitis del Rio from the Rockefeller Foundation. We have Ruth Oniang'o, who wears many hats and really, like Madonna, should only go by Ruth. So
Terrible. Oh, God.
we have Julie Borlaug from the Borlaug Institute at Texas A&M University. We have Jamie Anderson from CGAP, the Consultative Group to Assist the Poor. And our moderator for the session will be Stephanie Strom from the New York Times. Yeah? A couple of housekeeping things. So, number one, as you may have already become accustomed to from other sessions, we are going to have graphic facilitation. So if you see Julie moving around and magic appearing on the screen, that's okay. That's supposed to happen. And the other thing is that we'd like to keep it very interactive. And so we're going to actually give you the opportunity to ask questions on the fly by tweeting them to us. We're going to have the screen, a Twitter feed of tweets related to this session. Yeah? And if you use the Twitter hashtag, #CGIAR_DD #32, which of course you're all familiar with, you know, that's what we all tweet all the time, right? But if you do that, it'll go into the moderated feed which Sam controls and will appear on the screen. And a number of times during the session, I'll pop in and transmit some of that to the panel. Okay? So that's it from me, and over to you, Stephanie, for the session.
Thank you very much, Ido.
Sure.
So I'd like maybe just to get us all grounded for each of you ladies first to describe what you do, right? And then we'll get into the meat of it. So have at it.
Okay, I guess I'll start us off. CGAP is a global partnership of about 40 organizations that are all dedicated to advancing financial inclusion. We're housed at the World Bank. And we, in essence, conduct very practical research, and then on the basis of the results, engage with financial service providers, policymakers, funders, and others who are interested in opening access to a wider range of financial services in low and middle-income countries. In essence, we're a blend of bilaterals, multilaterals, and private foundations. My team specifically focuses on financial innovation for smallholder households. And we're very active at the moment on demand-side information for smallholder households, looking at the specifics of the market in Tanzania and Mozambique, what's the overall picture of the smallholder sector, and then segmenting it into the particular profiles of smallholders, understanding their demand and supply of financial services with an eye for opportunities about where we can add value. So this is my perspective, coming from an organization that's a global partnership in a team that's very much a bridge between financial inclusion and agricultural development.
Great. Julie?
I kind of wear two hats when I'm out. Part of the Borlaug Institute for Texas A&M for international agriculture, which I'll get to in a second, but the other one is continuing my grandfather's legacy. So it's an honor to be here, and we kind of have a representation of his legacy because we have Rockefeller. I'm going to represent land-grant universities. We have CG Systems also here, and then we have Ruth, who, among many things, is president of the Saskatchewan African Association, which really brought my grandfather to Africa. So I do a lot of speaking on his legacy and how we all need to continue to work hard to end hunger and poverty. My other hat is with the Borlaug Institute. We are at Texas A&M. We are the international arm of agriculture. We're really kind of our own development agency. So a lot of our funding does come from USAID, USDA, and other entities. We partner with the CG Center, with local universities, local NGOs in country. We do, like everyone else right now, concentrate on Feed the Future countries. And we also partner with private sector and then other U.S. land-grant universities. So our development projects, and then we also do short and long-term training. I'll go to Ruth.
Where to start?
Thank you. I'm happy to be here. I'll be very brief, really. ILRI, through IDO, paid my way here. I'm vice chair of GFAR. I'm on the CIAT board. What else am I? I'm just too many things. But at the end of the day, I bring Africa to you.
That's what we're looking
Whenever I travel, I assume people are looking at, they see me and they see Africa. So I feel a responsibility. I normally call myself a self-appointed Kenyan ambassador. So I work very much on the ground with smallholder women farmers, with my own NGO, and I use that as a training ground. But I also am able to connect people who want to see where that is going to the ground. But at the same time, I also connect with policy. I served in the Kenyan Parliament for 5 years. I know how policymakers think, how they work, and I just connect the dots. I run a journal, and I'm a grandmother.
Okay.
And I think having been a grandmother proved that I'm a woman. In my culture, I have arrived. I can say anything and get away with it. So I'm just like the men. So really, I just get as much information as I can, so that if you ask me about Africa, about Kenya, I'm just able to tell you, you know. So long as I'm still alive, then that's what I do. But at the end of the day, I'm a food and nutrition scientist, trained in the US, courtesy of the American government and the Kenyan government, to go back home and try to change Africa.
Great.
And so ultimately, how do we make sure that all of us are better fed, are better nourished, we're food secure, but at the same time, we enjoy what there is to enjoy in life while we are alive? Thank you.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Christina?
Great. I'm Cristina Rumbaitis Del Rio. I work for the Rockefeller Foundation, which is a 100-year-old U.S. philanthropy, as many in this group will probably know. It has a proud history in agriculture, food security, and rural development issues. We work with various civil society actors, government, private sector, to build a more resilient and promote a more resilient world and promote more inclusive economies. And our mission has stayed the same for the past 100 years, which is to improve the well-being of humankind. I think it was mankind. We changed mankind. Change. And my particular group is leading a new sort of program area around ecosystems for the foundation. And we look at how ecosystems and healthy ecosystems contribute to more inclusive growth, as well as enhanced resilience.
Great. All right, so let's start out by having you all describe what your vision of the successful partnership in international agricultural research would be. If you could set it up yourself, what would it look like? Julie, you want to start?
Well, I'm going to start with two current examples. And Scott did not pay me for this one. But if you look at CIMMYT and what CIMMYT has been able to do with their maize research, with the Gates Foundation, with Monsanto, with other CGs and other universities, I think that's a great model, and what it's been able to do in Africa to get drought-tolerant, accessible seeds and high-yielding seeds to the smallholder farmers. I think that's a great example. I think another great example that goes beyond just CG is the Borlaug Global Rest Initiative, which again, the Gates Foundation has put together, but that is multinational. I can't remember how many organizations are involved in that, all the way from Australia to the ends of the earth, and to combat something as big as UG99, it takes a large collaborative effort, and I think those are two great ones. But of course, they all go back to finance and having the financial backing and great partnerships, and I think when we look at where we're moving forward, I think you have to have a strong financial backing, and you also need to have a strong mission and agreement of what you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, money, it always comes back to money, right? Ruth?
I would have everybody at the table. It takes time, but it's the only strong foundation you can build. Because normally, like you have scientists, they come and they think they know it. They want to tell the farmer. Sometimes the farmer knows more than they do, but they can't say so. You are policymakers in a different world. You are private sector doing their own thing. You have the media discovering to just report on your event. We forget about the women who really feeds the world, in Africa particularly, who feeds the people. And it's not lack of money. I think there's a lot of money misused and not enough investment. So we don't have yet what I would rather have. That's what I'm trying to do on the ground with my own women, because right now they are so proud to purchase inputs. Before they couldn't.
Right.
But it's so empowering for a farmer to tell you, I have this $1, $5, keep it for me, because in 2 months' time I want to purchase my seed. Because it's empowering that they are able to do that. So I think I would distribute the money better and have everybody at the table and just have mutual respect if really the end goal is the same, that we want to eliminate hunger and malnutrition.
I want to pick up on that. I think good partnerships are really built on trust and mutual respect. And the ones that I've seen work most effectively in the research realm, there's a co-production of knowledge. There's a co-designing of what you're working towards and how you're going to get there. That is shared between northern and southern institutions, between the sort of end users or audiences that you're trying to reach with the research, whether it's decision makers or smallholder farmers, that there's a participation and an involvement with respect at the beginning to really co-form what the partnership is about, and a complementarity. We often tend to form partnerships with very like-minded individuals and institutions, and those are great, those are alliances, but we tend to unlock greater potential when we partner with those that are a little unlike us and can challenge our thinking, can have different information, different access, different kinds of influence. And so I think it's important to look for that difference and complementarity in a good partnership as well.
So how would research fit into something like that?
Yeah, so a great example of some research that we've been supporting and proud to be supporting with the World Fish Center, the Global Observatory of Singapore, and many others, and those are odd bedfellows in and of themselves to some degree, is the Future of Fish initiative, which takes a look at the whole fish food system, both the sort of marine capture side, the aquaculture side, the small-scale production, large-scale production, and tries to put the whole picture together in terms of how much fish do we need to feed the future population, and where are we today, and how can we possibly bridge the gap, maintaining sustainability goals, food security goals. And that takes working with industry partners. It takes working with aquaculture, private sector aquaculture corporations. It takes working with scientists. It takes working with environmentalists who often aren't thinking about the food security implications of some of their decisions, and really bringing them together to negotiate. Okay, here's the number that we think we need to get to for the world that we want. How do we get there? What do we know? What do we know how to do already that can help us get there?
Well, so you mentioned working with the private sector, right? And I find a lot of times the NGO world is not always eager to work with the private sector. Why is everyone reluctant? And are they valuable partners? Are we, are people not realizing the potential there is in the private sector? Julie, you want to?
I think in terms of a university, we
Oh,
like
yes,
to partner
of course,
with
yes,
the private
yes.
sector. I think first you have to realize, especially in research, the public sector, we would like to be able to do the biotechnological research, the work on GMOs, work on anything that's forward thinking and innovation, but we don't have the funds, whereas the private sector does. So they kind of fill a missing link in that. They're also a lot more nimble in terms of moving things along than working through a bureaucratic nightmare. So there are advantages to working with the private sector. Now you do have issues on intellectual property that is hard with the CGs and private sector. So you do have those problems. But I think everyone does worry about what your reputation is going to be if you line up with a certain private sector company, and so a lot of people and a lot of NGOs worry about that. But I think a lot of NGOs have a misunderstanding of the capabilities of the private sector And I think we all know we have to work across value chains and across disciplines, and that is involving the private sector. They are the ones who can help bring the infrastructure in, bring the market access, and we have to have that. We haven't done it right in development, so without them, we're not going to be able to. So I think it's a new day, and we have to form those partnerships, and NGOs need to realize they haven't gotten it right. We've been at it for how many years in Africa, and it still hasn't changed. We're seeing a bigger change by involving the private sector and growing the local markets within regions.
Ruth, have you had any experience with a...
I work with everybody. I love it. Because look, you know, especially the nutrition side I come from, we don't want to work with who. But they are there in our countries. We eat what they market us. And I believe that if we bring everybody to the table, you come to some agreement. Right. Air your views and let everybody say why they do what they do. And many times, actually, they change. So for me, it's a question of just making sure you are transparent. I love my CIAT board because it enables me to say conflict of interest. And I've worked with Nestle, Coca-Cola, or someone. You know, Third Simmons gave me an award of industry the other day. You know, but at the end of the day, look, do what is right. Do what is right for everyone. So I think when you're addressing value addition, agro-processing, there is no way you can avoid the private sector. That's where the expertise is. You are addressing food safety, it is in the private sector. Look, you can get a bottle of Coca-Cola in a remote part of Kenya where there's no food. But you'll get a bottle of Coca-Cola. What is their distribution mechanism? How can we get food from where it is in abundance to where it isn't? It's really private sector. Private sector can actually go into partnership with the universities, fund research, at the same time create jobs for your graduates. And also private sector has the leverage to work and enter offices of presidents where I can't, you know, because they have money maybe, but they have a leverage that we can get them to use to get policy makers and governments do the right thing. And they fund research, but we make sure that even us as researchers, we remain credible. Because we can't also make policies, we can't do programs if we don't have the research. You know, it has to be evidence-based and it comes from research. So I just believe that having everybody around the table and coming to some agreement, you know, and having a good moderator like Stephanie, you know, it will work, yeah.
Yeah.
Just following on what Ruth was saying, I think for us in the financial inclusion community, this is much more natural. We have much more of an ecosystems approach where the private sector is always at the table and the NGO community is there and community-led approaches to financial services. And we see it as more of an ecosystem with overlaps and limitations and some have their own natural habitat. And the goal, I think, from our point of view, isn't to push organizations where they aren't comfortable or beyond their natural space of work, but to find opportunities to work together, whether it's a formal financial institution that can partner with community-led savings groups and look for the intermediaries that can open access to the services that we care about. But it's not so much, it's not an either-or approach, it's recognizing different mandates and different organizational cultures and working as a translator between them.
And who serves that translation function? You know, who's the translator?
I think for us, it's our organization. We're that sort of platform. I mean, as a specific example of this, we were recently doing some research on digital applications of financial services for smallholder households. And so we wrote the paper, we did the research, and then we started circulating it to peers in the agricultural development community and in more of the financial inclusion community. And the comments that we got back from different colleagues were evidenced their different areas of expertise. And it became very clear that we needed to speak a language that recognized the concerns of the agricultural community and also spoke to private sector financial inclusion community as well. So for example, one of the comments that we got back from more of the financial inclusion community was, well, what's a value chain? What's value chain finance? Why is that important for agriculture? So we sort of sit back and think, okay, we need to clarify some parts of the paper. And then from a colleague on the agriculture side, she came back and said, what's a mobile wallet? And I confess there that I had to go talk to a colleague and say, well, what actually, what do we mean by that? Are we talking about just payments or something you do on a cell phone? So we realized that we needed to be much more deliberate and thoughtful and inclusive in our language to bring these sectors together and find these complementarities.
Yeah, it's sometimes we're separated by language, right? It's especially the nonprofit world has its language, the business world has its language, the farmer has his language. And so talk a little bit, if you would, ladies, about sort of the challenges that you see to more inclusive, this kind of smorgasbord partnership that we're talking about, where it involves everyone from the ground up to the funders, right? What's going to be the biggest hurdle to be gotten over?
I think shared resources. At our end, who holds the contract?
Right.
Who holds? I know we need to get beyond that, but in reality, who's the prime on the contract, and how are they handling the resources, and is it done fairly, and are all the partners actually at the table making the decision? And I wish it wasn't a fight, but I think everyone can attest that that's probably one of the most complex things to actually get the project up and running. So I think that's where we find a lot of frustration.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can add to that. I think donors often do add way too many constraints on partnerships. And don't give them the time or the space to be creative, to develop that shared vision, or the time even to develop that shared vision. All too often, we treat partners as, or partnerships and networks and the like, as sub-consultants or consultants that are meant to execute A, B, and C, and don't really give the space for that co-creation of knowledge. And I think more patience is also part of it. These things do take time, that intermediation, that understanding each other's language, the building of trust. All of that takes some time, and funders can help facilitate that at times when we're a neutral body and have a convening power. For instance, we spend a lot of time trying to convene the private sector with different nonprofit groups together to kind of develop a shared vision, and sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. But it takes some time and patience, and that seems to be in short supply.
In response to time, the other thing is a true research, successful development project can't be done in 2 to 3 years, 2 to 5 years.
Right.
And I know, within the U.S., our Congress wants to see a quick return on what the taxpayer money is doing. But we need to go back to having longer-term strategies where we can actually build the capacity, and then it can further exist once we pull out. And 2 to 5 years isn't going to make a successful project.
And Julie, actually, to add on to that, you are not yet born, but Rockefeller Foundation, when they used to fund agricultural research, they stayed there for the long haul. This idea of 3 years, I don't know where it came from. Because before you even see anything, you are already being asked to write a final report. Right. So I think commitment needs to be on the donors as well. To just say, look, and if it means picking a community that you are going to work with and stick with them, you can then begin to see results, maybe after 10 years. I think it's absolutely critical. And to also say, look, I just became a year ago vice chair of GFAR, and I'll be out again in another 1 year. And one of the challenges I faced there was how you get the GFAR, a group of diverse groups of farmers, and they were not so keen on private sector, and other groups representing different regions. And one of the challenges is how much of smallholder farmer are they really representing, the ones who are there? And then when you do really something, will you begin to see impact because they represent everyone? And also just forging a relationship that is comfortable between this GFAR and the CGIAR. I think we are coming from a past where we have just been in a silo and we do our thing, and I don't know about someone else, where now circumstances are forcing us that we must really work together. And it's something we really must work on if we want to begin to solve these world problems, begin to see our work make impact, begin to see numbers of the hungry really come down, and that at the end of the day, people don't want to just be spared hunger, but people want quality food, quality life. What else is around you that makes you enjoy life. And so I think people are really expecting more than just saying, oh, okay, we want to get rid of the hungry, maybe reduce the numbers. So what do we do? Some of the insecurity, I see Stephanie right now, and Kenya is a real target by this. They take young people who are idling. Yes, we have given them education, they have gone to school, but they are idling. An idling mind and a young mind is terrible. So they then, begin drafting them into those Al-Shabaab things that you are hearing about.
Right.
So I link that also to the insecurity and terrorism we see right now. Yeah.
And how does that then impact international partners who are trying to...
That they should look beyond just solving the hunger problem.
Okay.
That is the quality of life. Okay?
Right.
Food.
Good job.
When you're hungry, you're very hungry
education,
also. Yeah, okay,
Right.
food. But then link it to something else. Develop the agriculture, produce jobs, and it's a great opportunity there that we keep all these youth engaged. And I think it's a global problem right now.
Well, so we haven't talked much about government and what government does, right? Where does government fit into a partnership? Is it just there to make policy and let everyone else carry through on it? Should it be more active? Should it be more transparent? What are your thoughts? Ruth?
Governments are a partner that we must have even when we don't want to have them.
Very diplomatically put.
Yes, Actually, like Sasakawa, we demonstrate, I found them always working with government. Dr. Borlaug would arrive, Mr. Sasakawa, your former president here, Jimmy Carter, they arrive, they are met on the runway,
right,
and they head straight to the government. And so that way you demonstrate, and then the government system extension picks up the technology. And they are the only ones who can upscale and outscale. So you get the government buy-in, and we still do that. It's very, very critical, and where we have worked, and it works quite well. But governments can also make life very difficult. I know of countries, Kenya is okay, you can just come, arrive, I pick you at the airport, you come to my village. But there are governments where you cannot go to any farmer group without going through the bureaucracy. So one has to invest in that, make sure you know people in countries, make them your partners as well, not messengers you send, do ABCD, make them your partners as well if you want to work in a country. But fortunately, this year, I think Ambassador Roda was here to Musime. This year, African governments, for the first time, they agreed to support agriculture and food security. Hopefully, nutrition has been added on it to honor the Maputo Declaration of 10 years ago and to make this year of African agriculture and food security. So we are moving somewhere. And then to add on to that, to stamp it, your president brought them all here. I don't know how he managed to get them. They came here, and they said they are going to do the right thing in terms of governance. So when you look, say, at Africa and the whole development structure, the governance issue is so critical. And that if you can penetrate or get a buy-in at the AU level, it's like they put pressure on each other. But it's absolutely necessary that you have the right policies and that you get government buy-in and you understand those policies. But otherwise, really, we need to work together.
Julie, so you work in the international arena, so you're involved with these governments too. What's it like to be an American working with the governments?
Well, I think one of our most successful projects at A&M was the Pearl Spread project funded by USAID, and it was in Rwanda, and it actually started the coffee sector, and it was a value chain approach that started with forming cooperatives all the way to market access. The reason why that program was so successful, and she won't take credit for it, but Minister Agnes Kalibata, who was here earlier, really got behind it. I don't know if it was because she was a woman and that's why it was successful.
No, Rwanda.
Rwanda was...
Yeah, but also Rwanda supports the women.
But she, if she saw roads needed to be built, it wasn't a debate on when we were going to get it done, it was done. So she really listened to the stakeholders, to the U.S. stakeholders, to the Rwanda University and the farmer cooperatives, and really made it happen. And I think when you have a leader like that, you're going to move agriculture forward. But it couldn't have been done had we not had her buy-in and support.
And just one other point on that. We often think of governments as the receivers of information. They're going to receive information about good pilots and then scale them up. And change often just doesn't happen that way. And we need to think a little bit more on the demand side for research. We're producing a lot of supply, but we need to also start cultivating demand and educating decision makers and governments on how to use research evidence. They're not exceptional on that, and there's an interesting review that DFID just put out on research use for development that's quite troublesome. And one point that's made within that is the low level of capacity of decision makers globally, not just in the global south, to really use evidence in decision making. And so I think there's a gap there that needs some filling.
My grandfather, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Well, my grandfather was always successful in getting the presidents and the decision makers out to the fields. And Ruth has been very successful. And we were just in Uganda at the Sasakawa meetings, and the former president of Benin, who was always very involved and out there, and he got involved in agriculture because I believe Sasakawa and others had him out in the field to see the importance, and I think that's what we have to convey.
I just wanted to pick up on a point that I think we've made it in different aspects of our comments, and that's the importance of personal relationships. And there's only so many phone calls or emails or coffees that anyone can have in the course of their career. But there's a special interaction that comes from talking to someone one-on-one and understanding what motivates their organization, what's the constraint that they're trying to solve, that your organization or your contacts might be able to assist with in making those sorts of relationships. And it is a question of trust. And sometimes I think we can inadvertently diminish the importance of personal relationships, and it won't only happen because you have this conversation or that conversation or make this connection, but there is something fundamental there that can't be overlooked, even though it is time-consuming. It's important.
So Ido says he has some questions.
Yes, so there's been a lot of tweets going about, and some of them are actually asking some interesting questions. So I'm just going to throw a few out there, and then feel free to jump on them. Some are specifically addressed. So Ruth, people want to know whether you can name the top 3 challenges for African farmers and how partnerships can help on that. Is it market access? Is it urbanization? Is it runoff of youth to the urban areas, etc.? There was a comment that says, we all agree that we have to work together, but who has time to do all of these partnerships? So can you comment a bit about what that means?
Sure.
That's
a lot of work.
There was also a question whether you can give an example of a non-successful partnership. And also, have we learned what not, in capital letters, what not to do? And how good is the CGIAR at this learning? Question mark. There was a question specifically on what added value does CGAP has to offer. Is it just financial support, or do you have something else that you're bringing into this mix? And there was also a question about the natural role of extension agents as partners, but that national governments are killing and underfunding them. So what's the direction that we should follow on that?
That's plenty of food for thought, ladies.
Where to start?
Where to start? Ruth, you want to start with the 3 things African farmers need?
They need everything.
No, you're only allowed to pick 3 things.
Yeah, I'm talking of smallholder farmers.
Yes.
And for Kenya, for some of the countries I work in, including Uganda, no more than 2 hectares. Okay. In Kenya, we have a whole area, middle class, but they are point something of an acre. But it's because they went into intensive agriculture a long time ago. A long time ago. So we cannot wish smallholder farmers away. We have to make sure we support them. They work best when they are either in cooperatives or, in my case, in groups. They market together. They have microfinance. they are able to purchase together, but you have to stay close to them to make sure their governance stays transparent, because that's what really breaks them down.
Yeah.
One person comes up and messes up the whole thing, and it breaks down. So really, you have to go in and stay the long course with them. They need to be shown where the markets are. So that's why I say it's better you choose a place where you are going to work, and then maybe a village at a time. You can't just say, I'll have this policy and I'll reach 6 million farmers. You have the policy, yes, but when it comes to intervention, it has to be very, very local, and that trust has to be built. It takes a bit of time before you start to see results. Now, who said who has all this time? Don't go in if you don't have the time.
Right.
You
Right.
have to have time. Any relationship, even a courtship between husband and wife, I mean, for those of you who did it, it takes time. It takes time. And you have to
Yes.
continue watering it and nurturing it.
Yes.
So that's what I would say.
Okay. And what was the next one you do?
Oh, there was a bunch there. So
Oh, well,
there was a question to Jamie on the value add of
Sure.
CGAP.
For CGAP, to clarify, CGAP isn't a financial service provider. We might, as part of our research, we might make a grant to an organization as part of a larger effort. But CGAP is designed to be a catalyst. We do research that's intended to be catalytic in the market. So, for example, for the demand side surveys that I referenced earlier, we're doing these nationally representative household surveys of the smallholder sector in sub-Saharan Africa and in Asia, with the intent of developing a segmentation of the smallholder market such that we can sit down with financial service providers, policymakers, funders, and say, there is a segment of smallholders in your market, country, region that's this size, they have this sort of proportion of their income from agriculture, these are the sort of crops they're growing, these are the markets they're involved with. They have this unmet demand for financial services. They want to make this sort of payment on a mobile phone. They want to save the income that they earn from crops in this time of year to pay for school fees at that time of year. How can you meet this need? How can this information be catalytic to help to design a financial service that's relevant to this group of households? So this is CGAP's role in the market.
I think there was a question on non-successful partnerships, and
Yes.
I'll own
You
up
wanna-
to one. I have a few to choose from. And this is a partnership I helped build between, and I'm going to keep it anonymous, but between two African research centers and a Western research center. And the idea was that they would all collaborate and carry out some collaborative research on climate and agriculture. It ended up being a very extractive relationship between the Western organization, which got the grant because they were easier to work with and wrote a much better proposal, and they ended up subcontracting to the African institutions and being more of a project manager. And it totally failed. It was supposed to be building capacity. In the end, it caused more frustration and lack of trust. And sure, some information was generated, but it was just poorly structured. And to me, that's why I really want to overemphasize the point of creating equitable partnerships. And in most cases, I think nowadays they need to be Southern-led. We need to do away with necessarily giving the grant to a Western, Northern, European, you name it, organization to then contract out to Southern partners. That just it just doesn't work, and the time for that has passed.
Well, that brings it. One question people always have is how does accountability get sorted out? Because one of the reasons that money hasn't just been gone to the South and has always passed through Western organizations, right, is because people have this concern about accountability.
Yeah.
So in a partnership where you can have 3 to 5 to 8 to 10 partners involved, how do they hold each other accountable, right?
Yeah, and
who
that's
takes charge?
Transparency
Right?
comes in, and taking time to build that trust and build that partnership first. So sometimes you need to give a ill-formed grant from where I sit to build a partnership. You can't just jump right in and say it's going to do X, Y, and Z. And that's part of the time issue and patience issue.
There also needs to be some sort of element of governance, even when everyone's working from goodwill and trust each other.
Yeah.
You know, to the extent that there's some sort of framework in place that people can work within, it helps to clarify expectations, set out a path ahead, and makes things a bit easier.
How easy is it to come up with a framework like that?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, if a new framework needs to be created every time. I mean, each partnership, you know, because it does take a lot of time, and I think we recognize that it needs to be formed in whatever way is necessary to meet the end goal. I mean, there are some sort of partners who I think of, who I exchange information with. Maybe it's more of a network or something that's a very informal partnership. And then there are partnerships, I guess, like our organization, that are very formal, that have their own governance structure and a board, and there's representation on the board, and there are very specific guidelines about how strategies are produced and how internal decisions are made. But I don't think it doesn't need to be created from scratch every time.
I just wanted to give us an example of what I've seen within the CG system, where they have one auditor who goes around, you know, but I'm aware of a northern donor who formed a consortium of African organizations that received grants. Actually, mine was one of them. But they had their own auditor, someone they trust, closely monitoring, not just auditing, but closely monitoring what was going on. Because otherwise, if you are sitting over there, you have given money, all you are imagining is how corrupt these Africans are, and they are eating the money, you know, nothing is happening. So you have to create a framework where you closely monitor, but also capacity build the institutions in terms of reporting, accountability, and so on, all those things.
And how often does money get devoted to basically nurturing the partnership, if you will, as opposed to simply doing the project that's at hand, you know, achieving the goal that's at hand? How often?
Not too much.
Not too much.
I don't think a donor likes to cut out $1 million for
And it's hard to be
networking
able
opportunities.
to do that. But I mean, from where I sit at a philanthropy, not a traditional bilateral aid donors, where we have a little bit more flexibility, I think that's an excellent use of philanthropy. And it's risky because you don't always know what you're going to get at the end. But from what I've seen, you get more relevant research products when you take the time to nurture those relationships. But I'm sure those resources are scarce and few and far between.
I think the other thing is that, for example, Western countries don't make use. I was just in Australia. I come here also. They don't make use of their graduates who have gone back. Yeah, really.
That's interesting.
Yeah, I remember in one meeting saying, look, I came here courtesy of the American government. There's no way I'm going to eat that money and misuse it. If it's misused, because I didn't have the capacities to use it properly. So I think you don't make enough use of graduates who have gone back. Then they go back, they may have PhDs, they have no tools of trade, they start doing other things, they are just in a bad situation. But I know one university, I don't know which program, maybe Cornell graduates, Cornell University will always go and look for their graduates for any projects. Because that way you know them, you trust them, you are showing them, you empower them, and usually the allowances they get is slightly higher than the local income they get. So they are comfortable, they stay back in the country.
Well, so now it's your turn. So I'd love to get some questions from you out there. Anybody? In the back there?
Thank you very much. My name is Graham Johnston. I'm not a scientist. I'm on the board of CIAT. And I listened to the partnership thing very interestingly, and what I see from a business perspective is partnership presupposes that there's an equal, that you're trying to have level playing fields at the end of the day. But what subverts the whole thing is the contract, where it introduces the master-servant relationship immediately. And so really you're saying one thing, but you're doing something completely different. And I just wondered if any on the panel have come across any sorts of agreement which does away with this master-servant idea.
Graham, you know you are right. You know, I think it's changing. I'm aware of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation.
Yeah, we're aware of it.
They-
That little foundation
they
in Seattle.
they put certain conditions. You know, it's like it's gender equity or what have you. This has to be led by an institution in the South. I think the donors just need to also be clear on what they want to achieve and try to harmonize by putting those conditions in and spending time to do so. And then also earlier in another session, I said, look, we are busy trying to get the community to adjust, but as we are not adjusting. You know, it's like things as always. We also have to do things differently. Yeah, so the kinds of contract that Graham is talking about should not even exist anymore, because right from the beginning you are creating tension. Right from the word go.
Anyone else? Any over here?
Ruth, you mentioned use of graduates going back home. I just wanted to throw this at you. I've come to realize that in Africa, the political people, the policymakers, they don't respect African intelligentsia. They don't listen to Africans most of the time. They prefer to get expertise and opinion from outside. So I see a situation where, in terms of partnership, we should try to validate those who are there and actually have the capacity and the knowledge so that they are also now, they're at least going to be listened to. I just want your thoughts on that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Actually, when I said make use of those who have graduated and going back, it's not at the exclusion of those who are in the countries. Because many times I see and I'm contacted, you know, and we want to use someone, people don't know who to use, yet you already have your graduates who are here to try and let you understand the local environment. Make use of them, they live in, then connect you with others who are there. So it was not to the exclusion. But you are right, you know, that is our own local environment in Africa. Why don't they respect intellectuals? Because they themselves don't have much of a brain, you know, they are afraid. They are afraid. Our politicians don't have timed, like in Kenya we now have a constitution. If someone just says they want to stay a little longer, there'll be a riot. That's the first thing that will cause a riot. Finish your term and get out. But there are many countries where people stay in office for life. And the minute they see someone who sounds like they're a bit bright, upcoming, the first thing they want to do is get rid of them. So that's why they fear. But you know, as we get more and more enlightened legislators, which will take maybe 2 centuries, we shall begin to see them value their own people. They are actually, but you are right, it's everywhere. They just don't respect our own people. They'd rather listen to Julie, young as she is. She's come from outside. Yeah? She's so young, she's like my granddaughter. But they won't listen to me with my PhD, even trained overseas. But when I take Julie, you know, the door of the president will open, you know. Something is very wrong. So that's something for us on the continent we have to work on. We have to work on.
Right here?
Yes, good afternoon. I'm Juan Lucas Restrepo. I'm the chair of GFAR. Ruth is our co-chair, so we work together. And I'm also the head of Corpoica, which is the Colombia's National Research Institute. And I have a couple of comments. The first one is that I believe when we address partnerships, we have had historically the tendency to be too linear. I need to work with this community, or I need to work or not with this national institute. And that's probably how the business has evolved. But now I think we need to look at the other way around. We need to include everybody. We need to make and to address the process in a much more complex manner. Because if we're talking about agricultural research for development, it's really difficult not to identify a role for the farmers, for the communities, of course, but for the extension, for education, for the private sector, for the public sector. A successful partnership needs some way or another to take into account all those actors and try to integrate them in any venture, in any initiative. And sometimes we are oversimplistic. We just say, okay, we just need to find an extension service agent and work through them, and that's it. So just putting on the table that we need to address this in a much more complex manner. And the other comment is just building on what Cristina said and a few others. You said that trust and mutual respect are key. And I agree on that. And from my Corpoic experience, we have something very similar. We say, and it's at the core of our values as an institute. And it's trust and mutual recognition. And mutual recognition means that whenever you're going to the ground, to a landscape, to a specific situation, you really need to understand who's there, who is already there, who's been there for a long time, what their capacities, capabilities are, and try to work through them and not compete. So at the end of the day, the role of whatever you want to do there is complementary and not competitive with what is already there as in the local innovation systems.
Interesting. So maybe
There's another question.
Oh, okay.
I have a question about learning from these projects. And that's that very often, especially when projects are complex, it's hard to capture the full set of not just information, but the way, the processes that have worked to have something successfully happen or unsuccessfully happen. And it's really important that we have better documentation so that as we go forward, we can refer to things specifically. So that's one issue, is how do we reduce this complexity into something that can really be a stepping stone for a next step or be used elsewhere. And the other issue is that very often in these kinds of participatory activities, the participants aren't involved in writing the reports, summarizing them, or even reading them. And they can possibly not even see themselves sometimes in what the next steps are. So how do we make the information more conducive to learning?
Julie, you want to take it?
One thing we've thought of at the Borlaug Institute is having something similar to the Harvard case studies, but in agricultural development, where you do discuss your best case practices and your opportunities for growth, failures. So that is something we've talked about. Of course, that takes time and funding, but we haven't found anything out there. And I think it would be great so that anytime any of us would go into a project, we could go to that resource and you could already see who's done it, how they approached it, and what we can learn about some approaches we thought would work. And also you can tap into them and ask them, what would your suggestions be? If any of you would like to come and work with us on that and grow the idea, that would be great. But that's something we've been playing with. And I think it's something really missing.
I think the Gates Foundation tried doing that a little bit at the beginning. I sort of remember there were these case studies on their websites, and they were pretty honest. I mean, as honest as a big foundation is going to be, right?
And Per Pinstrup Anderson has some from, and they're free for anyone to use, and he's up at Cornell. And he'll actually, you can get the book for free as well, and that's similar.
Yeah, okay.
Just on that point as well, Louise, this is something that we've been talking about at CGAP, how to do case studies that are quite detailed and operational, that aren't a sort of colorful, fun story about what organizations have done, that are also quite critical. And of course, it's very difficult to find organizations that feel comfortable coming forward and talking about their failures, and somehow tarnishing their reputation
or their partners,
right? And then how do they go forward? So one of the ideas that we've explored, but we haven't taken this forward yet, is how can we do that in aggregate? And maybe it's easier for looking at financial service providers. How can we take a number of cases of different sorts of applications of finance for agricultural households and have a narrative that describes them, but when we talk about their financial information, pool it. So the information is there, but you can't tell which institution was really struggling. So it's a bit blended and a bit fuzzy. So this is an approach we've talked about, but we haven't taken that forward yet. But that's one idea.
Any other questions?
Stephanie, also, more and more I'm hearing of really, if you, I get weary when everything sounds positive. Something surely, that's not life, you know.
Yeah.
So if you don't fail, then you are not going to learn anything. So we encourage even our own field stories. What didn't go right? It depends on how you actually put it.
Well, Ito and I were talking a little earlier. Both of us have been in one of these things called fail-fair, right? And it's basically, it started out as talking about the failure of technology and development. And the first one I went to was actually at the World Bank, and everyone confessed their sins. And it was very therapeutic, and they gave away, what was it, one of those green computers that gets passed around that Nicholas Negroponte came up with, right? The laptop computer. As the prize for the worst failure.
Okay, so I'm going to change the direction of the discussion a little bit. My name is Achampon from the Yale School of Forestry and Environmental Studies, and I'm representing International Forestry Students Association. It's on vertical diversity. I guess most of you have been part of the youth, and probably there was a point in time where you really had a very good idea and a very good understanding of a problem that your father or your professor or your teacher just wouldn't listen to you. So, but then we grow up, and then we also become like just as our fathers and just as our professors. So my question is, one, when is the youth going to be taken serious? Secondly, what do you expect from us? We know that everybody is, more like we don't want to take risks, right? But then when you don't make mistakes, you don't learn, right? And when you grow up, you have your own little baby ideas that you get stuck with. It's very difficult for you to change. Yeah. But then you can't be doing the same thing and expecting a change. So
thank you for asking that question.
How are you going to use our inexperience and our propensity to make mistakes?
I have an hour-long conversation I could give you, and
you've only got about.
I'm going to do this quickly because I was going to put this in part of my summary, but youth and the next generation are the answer, and I have tons of things I could tell you about. But if you look at my grandfather, his breakthroughs at Summit were in his 30s. He was unconventional. He thought outside of the box. He quit. He was fired I don't know how many times, but he believed in his research. But what made the Green Revolution successful was his firm belief that you had to spend time and train the next generation. And we've gotten away from that. And he often thought researchers, some of his fellow colleagues, became so ivory-towered they were unwilling to invest in those younger than them because they probably knew they had better ideas. So some of the things I'm involved in that are helping give youth a voice is the Thought for Food Challenge. And we have a representative that I've brought today so she could learn a little more. But what that is, it's a platform for university students from all over the globe to come together. They form multidisciplinary teams of 5, and we challenge them to come up with unconventional, out-of-the-box thinking of how we're going to feed 9 billion people. And it's on a social media platform. It's phenomenal. Then there's a summit where it's like a Shark Tank, and we bring the top 5 teams together, and there's mentoring, and then there's judges, and there's a prize, a financial prize at the end. And what we're trying to do is empower that next generation, let them know they have a seat at the table, and that we believe in them. And we need to scale those up, because those are the ones who are going to win. If you follow me on Twitter, If you don't, you should. It's just Julie, at Julie Borlaug. But I tweeted today that the Google Prize went to 3 teenagers, young teenagers in Ireland, who came up with a way to grow food through
like
bacteria.
That's what they eat.
Yes.
Or something or
It's
grown
something
in.
like that.
It sounds more gross than it is.
But these are teenagers. And what we like about the next generation is they don't see the bureaucracy. They don't see it as we've been at this for 100 years. They're optimistic. So everybody in this room, you're challenged to become a part of Thought for Food, but more importantly, invest in the next generation. Someone invested in you, and it's now your time to pay it forward. And I think we've gotten away from a lot of that.
So we are here at the behest of a research institution. So I'd like you all to talk a little bit about how research factors into partnerships. How do you use research? When should it start? Does research start at the outset? Does research predate the project? How does it get incorporated into a partnership?
Maybe I can.
Yeah?
Maybe I can just tag on and add on. Is the CGIAR learning
He's
how
gonna make
to
you be
partner
specific.
for critical capacities that we may not have, as opposed to just, treating partners as service providers? We'll just, we'll outsource the part that we don't want to deal with, and we'll call that partnership. How is that process? Because I know we're trying, but how is that perceived?
I think you're trying. You're definitely trying. I think we all have a long way to go. I think the CG Center does. I think universities do, NGOs. But research is the basis of everything. So you have to have it on the front end, even before, as you suggested. But the most important thing is that it's integrated and it gets all the way down to the farmers. And somehow or another, it always seems to get lost. And no one takes the time to make sure, as everyone has heard today, that it is taken to the farmers. And I think that's where research and development.
Where does it get stuck?
Well, part of the
in the publications,
and we all know why we moved from an agrarian economy. I mean, the land grant system and the research training and extension is what got us to where we are. It's a very simple model, but for some reason it hasn't been able to be successful. It's not going to be like the U.S. model. A lot of it can be done on your cell phone now. But I think there's not the investment or the ability to have a lot of extension agents. And there's just a breakdown between the government, the universities, and then the farmers.
And then the farmers, yeah.
I think there's some vested interests here that might need to be acknowledged. I mean, one of the things about research is we tend to think of it as the purview of scientists, PhDs, skilled people. And so while there may be consultation, participatory workshops, farmer participation at the beginning, it then tends to get locked up in academia and the ivory towers, and it never gets back down. And so, and that's because, let's fess up, as scientists, we sometimes have a vested interest in sort of protecting our expertise, and we talk to each other and validate each other, and don't necessarily want to come back to the farmers and translate into the language and information that's useful for them. And that's a very cynical view, and I apologize for that. But I think there is a bit of a barrier there that is worth calling out. But to the specific question about CGIAR, I think the new CRPs and the more integrated work and frameworks that those provide are forcing the CGIAR to work with different partners. I'm seeing World Fish Center working with CARE to really look at how aquatic agricultural systems work in I forget which parts of Africa, but there's new partnerships and new capacities that are being built and new communication styles and research outputs that are no longer just series of peer-reviewed publications as a result of this. Now, there's more to go, there's a longer road ahead, and I think Julie was right in that we all have a lot to learn and a lot to change about how we work to be able to facilitate that even more.
I would agree. It's a different atmosphere. I think we would all recognize that, but I think the feeling is that it's too early to tell. I think we're the air in the room has changed, but we're not quite sure where where it's going. But it's positive.
Yeah, I would say it's changing, but maybe we're just doing partnerships because we now must do partnerships. But maybe after evaluation, hopefully it will change. Because I also feel for the scientists, you know. They just completely stressed, overworked, traveling all over the place because they are doing partnerships. It's not easy, it's a lot of work. So maybe with evaluation, it can be more streamlined and more, framed in a way.
Use technology, right? To connect people.
No, you still need face-to-face, Well, so we hope after evaluation, maybe.
But I think even how we evaluate it needs to change. We need to evaluate who are we working with and how, and let them have a say in it as well. So I think.
And Cristina, I think also we forget that even farmers have knowledge. We need to tap.
Yes.
It can't just be down. No way.
Yeah.
No way. Yes. And I just wanted to assure the young person, maybe you need to come to Kenya. It is the old people who are complaining now. Everybody is young, even those who don't know anything. So we just also need to so we are really taking seriously the next generation, their current right now. But at the same time, we can't forget the gold, because it's a question of bringing everything together.
My alarm on. So Ido is telling me we have 10 minutes, right? So first, I'll ask you, is there anything... I have time for one more question out there. Anybody out there got a question? Okay.
Hi, Angela Hansen from Dahlberg. There are a number of sort of large-scale, continent-wide partnerships that exist in Africa, and a number of them are pretty high-profile at the moment. CATIP comes to mind, Grow Africa comes to mind. Are there any leading examples that you've had the opportunity to interact with that you think you'd hold up as, there are at least some tenets or some attributes of some of these partnerships that you think we should really try and emulate or carry through more of the sectoral work that we do?
Agra?
I was
going to say, we could talk about Agra.
Agra would be the example that comes to my mind. Certainly proud of the achievements that have been made and the way they, and I use they because we're a funder to them, not doing the work. My many colleagues are the ones actually doing the work, in the way they approach partnerships with the institutions that they work with, and then sub-grant too.
Agra, after we sort out how it moves, I don't know what we need to sort out with it, but Agra right now has a lot of promise. We they probably need to invest more in capacity building. There's always little money for producing the next generation. Really, capacity building from down up is absolutely critical. Are you funding them?
Yes.
Maybe you should.
Yes. I was about to say, you send Rockefeller into agricultural research. We are.
Really just capacity building. And I said before, I was in Australia. They had committed under the previous government to produce about 1,000 PhDs in Africa. A new government comes in, it's cut down. But at the end of the day also, we need to involve our own governments more. These governments are not as poor as they claim. They just put their monies elsewhere. So I think there are major donors who work in the space who need to hold some of these governments to account. Say, this is what we're putting in. What are you putting in? And I think this is the right time to do so.
All right. Well, because I've been given strict instructions, this has to end at 4. I'm going to give each of you... See how many minutes we have here. How many? He goes sitting there
90
looking at
seconds.
us. No, we have 5 minutes. So I'll give each of you 1 minute to sort of say what you think the most important point that needs to be made about this issue of research for agricultural development and partnerships. You're up.
Sure, fantastic. Partnerships, I think, the discussion and everyone's experience in this room, it's complex, it's fuzzy, there's no one recipe, it needs to be tailored to the objective, and it's a blend of governance and personal relationships.
I wish I'd brought a letter that Bob Havener gave to my grandfather on his 90th birthday, and Bob was the DG of CIMIT, and then my grandfather, and it was that they had helped build a phenomenal institution as well as the CG system, but sometimes it often did become too bureaucratic, and you sometimes had to let the baby elephant grow up and go out on its own and hope that those you trained would pull it back or move it forward. So I think we always need to be concerned that we're all becoming too bureaucratic in the process to move things forward. Take it to the farmers, remember youth, and then I also, this is my personal plug, take it to the public. We have a huge backlash on innovation. Anything that we are trying to move forward gets blocked by the anti-GMO. That may have nothing to do with GMO. And unfortunately, Monsanto is the poster child of everything bad. And everything is blocked by that. It is your responsibility, especially you scientists in the room, to remember you're talking to a lay public, a mom who believes everything on Facebook and thinks the food babe actually has a degree in agriculture. You have got to remember you need a 90-second elevator speech about why research is important, and it has to be to someone who has no background and thinks food grows in a grocery store. So please take your message to the public.
Look, this year we are remembering 100 years since Norman Borlaug was born. That was a top scientist, gone completely simple. He would arrive in Africa. They think they are looking, where is he? He's already gone to the farmer. He just didn't like paperwork, nothing. He just said, take it to the farmer. No meetings. He didn't even like meetings. And I'm not saying all of us should be like that. But the fact that you have just sat there listening to us, really have to commend you. Just have the passion.
All get a gold star.
Have the passion. There's a lot to do. The time is now. Enjoy it as you do so. When you don't know where to go, just come to Africa. Yeah, come to Africa. Come to my village. Come with Julie. You will make yourself relevant, isn't it? But the time is there for us actually to show how we can do with the next 100 years. Yeah.
Norma Borlaug.
The next 100 years means someone, I had them say, the rainbow revolution. Because now it has to be good nutrition. Before it was dealing with hunger, but right now we really need a diverse plate of food that makes our body feel much better and makes us happy. So it's now nutrition. We are adding on nutrition. It's
also
so critical.
Take care of our healthcare problems,
yes.
right?
Yeah, I guess the only thing I could add to those brilliant words are that we really need to think about partnerships in terms of the complementarities, not just in terms of what we need from others, but what we can offer. We need to be sort of, it's like going to a dinner party. You don't show up empty-handed. You need to be able to offer something.
I just come like that.
Yeah. And you need to accept different kinds of knowledge. It's not just scientific, technical knowledge. It's not just one discipline. We need to really open it up much more than we have been. And be willing to be patient, persistent, but patient, to give partnerships time to grow and nurture. And I guess my last point would be building the demand side for evidence and for research. I think we're just at a point in time where that's been flagging amongst decision makers in the private sector and governments. We really need to start putting the onus and build the demand for research and evidence so they use it.
Well, thank you all very, very much. It's been great, and thank you all very, very much. I am to give you the instructions that you are to go immediately down to the primary room for the keynotes after this session. So thank you all very, very much.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.